Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really digging into the current state of U.S.-China trade.
Yeah, it's complex. You see headlines slashing back and forth about tariffs, potential changes.
Exactly. And we know you want to grasp these, important global dynamics quickly without getting totally swamped. So consider this your fast track.
That's the goal. We've been looking closely at a recent Yahoo Finance interview with Shehzad Qazi. He's the international managing director at China Beige Book.
Right. And he really knows the Chinese economy, so his perspective is pretty valuable here.
Definitely.
So our mission today is, well, simple, really. Break down the sticking points in U.S.-China trade right now, explore where things might go, and, crucially, figure out what developments you actually need to watch.
Sounds good. Where should we start? The lack of top-level talk seems like a big one.
Yeah. Okay, let's unpack that. It feels like, a direct chat between President Trump and Xi Jinping would be the obvious move, but it hasn't happened. Why is that?
Well, Casey's insight here is really interesting. He argues that kind of direct top-level stuff, like a phone call between the presidents, it's pretty unlikely right now.
Unlikely. Why?
From Beijing's viewpoint, he says there's actually a lot of risk involved. A big concern is that maybe a casual remark gets misinterpreted, or maybe something gets announced prematurely from the U.S. side.
So it's not just picking up the phone. There's a whole strategic layer to it at that level.
Exactly. Casey makes the point that for the Chinese leadership, a meeting with Xi wouldn't be the start of a negotiation. It would be more like the end point.
The final sign-off.
Right. The culmination of a deal that's already been mostly worked out. Not the place where you hash things out initially. It's a different diplomatic mindset.
Okay, that definitely changes how you look at the silence at the very top. So if they aren't talking directly, are we just, stuck? Feels that way sometimes.
Well, that's a key thing Casey points out. While that direct presidential negotiation isn't likely soon, he actually thinks both sides do want to start talking.
Oh, okay. So the desire is there.
Seems so. The current impasse isn't necessarily about not wanting to talk. It's more about the positioning.
The optics, you mean? Saving face.
Yeah, basically. Both Washington and Beijing kind of want to look like the other side is the one blinking first, making concessions before talks really get going.
That makes sense. Creates a bit of a standoff.
It does. But Casey thinks the talks are likely to start, just maybe at a different level. Probably with the U.S. Trade Representative, the USTR.
Ah, okay. So the groundwork gets laid lower down the chain, maybe less publicly.
Precisely. And look, the USTR has talked with Chinese Vice Premier Hurley Fang before. Those channels exist. They've been used.
Right. So communication lines aren't completely dead.
No, not at all. So while we shouldn't, hold our breath for a big summit photo op right away, discussions are still definitely possible.
Interesting. So movement could be happening, just maybe not where the main spotlight is. Now, thinking beyond tariffs and trade balances, are there other issues, maybe non-trade things, that could help get talks going more broadly?
That's another good point.
Mm-hmm.
Casey raises these potential off-ramps, you could call them. He suggests looking at areas outside of pure trade.
Like what?
Well, he specifically mentions cooperation on fentanyl. That's something that's been under discussion already.
Mm-hmm. A shared problem.
Right. And if they make some progress there, maybe that builds a little bit of goodwill, potentially easing the way for other talks.
Okay, find some common ground first. Anything else?
The other one he brought up was the TikTok deal. Remember that? It's kind of stalled right now.
Yeah.
If talks on that were to restart, and maybe they reach some kind of resolution, that could also, improve the overall atmosphere, make broader negotiations seem more feasible.
So the path forward might not just be about tariffs. Other dominoes could fall first.
Could be. It suggests the relationship isn't just about the trade deficit figures.
Okay, let's get into the tariffs then, because that's been all over the news lately. We had those reports, didn't we, about the U.S. maybe slashing tariffs?
Right. The Wall Street Journal story is suggesting big cuts, like 50, 65%. That certainly got the markets buzzing.
But then that was walked back pretty quickly.
Yeah, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent clarified that no, President Trump hadn't actually offered unilateral cuts like that. It wasn't a formal proposal.
Okay, so talk of big, immediate cuts was perhaps jumping the gun.
Seems that way. But Casey does point out that President Trump has said he's open to negotiating on the 145% tariff.
So tariffs aren't completely off limits for discussion.
No, exactly. And the fact that the market reacted positively just to the idea of negotiation shows how much investors are watching for any sign of de-escalation.
But Casey also injects some realism here, right? He talks about the base case. What's that about?
Yeah, that base case idea is really central to his whole outlook. He basically thinks the most likely path forward isn't some grand sweeping trade deal.
Not the big one.
No. The idea that China is going to make, fundamental structural changes to its economy, how it handles IP, state subsidies, all that, just to eliminate the trade deficit with the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
He thinks that's unrealistic, especially not in the next, say, 2 or 3 years.
So forget about a massive overhaul of the whole relationship anytime soon.
That's his assessment. Instead, the base case, the most probable outcome, according to Qazi, is more like a series of smaller agreements. Mini deals, he calls them.
Mini deals, okay. Addressing specific things, presumably.
Exactly. Tackling narrower issues, one by one perhaps.
Mm.
And while investors might cheer these smaller wins,
Right. Any deal looks like progress.
Casey warns that they won't actually fix the fundamental problems. The deep disagreements, the underlying tensions between the U.S. and China, those will still be there.
So we're talking more like patching things up here and there rather than rebuilding the whole structure.
That's a good way to put it. And he emphasizes that because those core issues remain, we should expect continued volatility.
Volatility in the relationship and in the markets.
Both. He also points out that many still believe fundamentally changing the trade relationship is the main way forward, even if it causes short-term pain for the markets.
Okay, so this picture is one of ongoing friction, even with potential small agreements. What does that mean in, real-world terms? We've heard talk about an effective embargo.
Yeah, Casey brings up that serious concern. An effective embargo would mean the flow of goods just gets choked off, maybe stops entirely in some areas.
Wow.
And he raises the real possibility of product shortages hitting U.S. consumers. Why? Because inventories that businesses built up.
The front-loading you mentioned earlier, stocking up before tariffs hit.
Exactly. Once those inventories run down, if the flow hasn't restarted, well, you could see empty shelves for certain goods.
That would definitely get people's attention, a direct hit on consumers.
Absolutely. And that kind of scenario puts pressure back on the U.S. administration, right?
Yeah.
To find other sources, develop alternative supply chains faster.
Like in Mexico or Vietnam, maybe?
Those are the kinds of places often mentioned, yeah. To reduce that heavy reliance on China.
Okay, flipping it around, how resilient is China in all this? Can they just absorb the pressure?
That's a crucial question. Casey points out that China actually has some significant tools available. For one thing, they haven't really deployed massive economic stimulus recently, despite some expectations.
Unlike other countries, maybe.
Right. So they have that option in their back pocket. They can step in with large-scale support for their economy, especially for exporters and their industrial base, if things get really tough.
So they have some economic firepower left to use if needed.
They do. They have leeway. That doesn't mean they're immune, though. Casey acknowledges China is still definitely facing a potential economic slowdown because of all this.
It's not pain-free for them either.
Not at all.
Yeah.
But they do have capacity to respond.
Okay, one last piece here, this idea of transshipment. Casey called it a key mechanism for China. What is that, and why does it matter?
Right, transshipment. Basically, it's routing Chinese goods through other countries, say Vietnam or Mexico, before they get shipped to the U.S.
Like an indirect route?
Exactly.
Okay.
It potentially helps Chinese exporters get around some of the direct tariffs. Casey says this is happening quite a bit.
And is there likely to be a crackdown on that?
He doesn't expect an immediate harsh crackdown, which means for now it might provide a bit of a safety valve.
Helping keep some goods flowing to U.S. consumers, even if indirectly.
Potentially, yeah. It could offer some short-term stability even while the main trade dispute rumbles on.
Okay, so let's try to pull this all together. Based on Casey's analysis, it sounds like direct top-level U.S.-China talks. Pretty unlikely soon.
Right. Expect mini deals, instead smaller agreements on specific issues.
But those mini deals won't solve the big underlying problems. So expect continued tension, market ups and downs.
And even the risk of actual product shortages if things escalate badly.
Meanwhile, China isn't without options. They can use stimulus to cushion the blow.
And transshipment is acting as a kind of workaround for now, keeping some trade flowing under the radar.
Okay, so this deep dive, drawing on Shehzad Qazi's insights, hopefully gives you a clearer picture, cutting through some of the noise around U.S.-China trade.
Yeah, it highlights the key factors to watch, beyond just the daily tariff headlines. It's about the deeper dynamics.
So here's something to think about as we wrap up. If the future really is dominated by these mini deals and this kind of persistent friction, what does that mean long term? How do businesses, how do you as a consumer need to adapt?
Yeah, what strategies become necessary in that kind of environment? And are there other, maybe unforeseen consequences that could pop up from this ongoing tension?
Definitely food for thought. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.